The stench of sweat and fear permeated the slave market in Hedebe. Thora clenched the last 3 silver coins inside a worn leather purse, her fingers trembling not from the autumn chill, but from what she was about to do. The auctioneer dragged another man onto the wooden platform, stained with blood from previous sales. This one was different from the common thralls sold that morning, even in chains. Even with his face marked by purple bruises and a deep cut across his left eyebrow, the warrior kept his head high. His blue eyes scanned the crowd with such palpable disdain that several buyers flinched. "Gunnar Eriksson," the auctioneer announced in a hoarse voice, captured after the battle at the river Divina, where his jarl and all his shield brothers had perished. The chains clinked as the warrior was forced to turn, revealing a back marked by recent lashes and a body that still displayed muscles trained by years wielding axe and shield. The starting price was set at 5 silver coins, a low price for an experienced warrior, but the whip marks and reputation for insubordination kept buyers hesitant. No one wanted a slave who'd rather die than obey. Thora knew that expression. She had seen it in her own father's eyes before Jarl Svein's men took him away in chains, accused of stealing cattle he had never touched. 3 winters had passed since then. 3 winters working as a servant in a merchant's household, saving every sliver of silver, surviving on scraps the dogs refused, all to save enough to buy her father's freedom. But the letter had arrived the previous moon, brought by a merchant from Kiev. Her father was dead, worked to exhaustion in the salt mines. The 3 coins in her purse were all that remained of years of humiliation and hunger. Insufficient for any future, insufficient even for passage on a merchant ship away from Hedeby. The auctioneer's voice cut through her thoughts, announcing that if there were no bids, the warrior would be sold to the southern mines. The same fate that killed her father. Gunnar didn't react to the announcement, but something in his jaw tightened. He knew the mines were a slow death sentence. Before she could think, before reason could stop her, Thora raised her hand. 3 silver coins. Her voice came out firmer than expected. The market fell silent. Women did not buy warriors. Unescorted women, wearing patched clothes and worn shoes, definitely did not buy warriors. The auctioneer frowned, studying her with suspicion. She pushed through the crowd, emptying her purse onto his table. The 3 coins clinked, pathetic in their insignificance. The auctioneer picked up the coins, bit one to verify its authenticity, and nodded. "Sold," he grunted, clearly dissatisfied with the miserable profit. 2 guards shoved Gunnar from the platform toward Thora. He was tall, she realized, needing to tilt her head to look at him. Even through the dirt and dried blood, his face held aristocratic features, pronounced cheekbones and an old scar across his chin. His eyes studied her with an intensity that made her stomach churn. The guard threw the chain into her hands. "He's your problem now, woman," the man spat on the ground. "If he tries to run or kill you, it's not our responsibility." Thora held the chain with hands that now trembled visibly. What had she done? She'd spent everything she owned on a stranger, a captured warrior who would probably kill her given the chance. Gunnar watched the exchange without a word, but something changed in his expression when he saw her hands. Small hands, calloused from hard work, with broken nails and fingers shaking with barely contained fear. "Do you have shelter?" His voice was deep, hoarse from disuse. Thora blinked, surprised he spoke. "No," she admitted. "I have a corner in the merchant's barn where I worked." She corrected herself mentally. Her employer would not welcome her showing up with a chained warrior. Gunnar studied the surrounding market, calculating. "Then take me to the woods beyond the palisade. There we'll decide what to do." It was an order, not a request, but Thora detected something beyond command in his voice. A proposal, perhaps. A chance. They crossed Hedeby under curious stares and murmurs. The city buzzed with activity, merchants shouting their wares, smiths hammering bronze and iron, women exchanging gossip while washing clothes in the river. The smell of dried fish and tanned leather mixed with that of the forges. No one stopped them, only watched the strange pair with morbid interest, a woman leading a chained warrior like cattle. Thora kept her eyes fixed on the path, ignoring the vulgar comments from drunks and the cruel laughter of children. The woods began just beyond the last houses, where the wooden palisade gave way to ancient moss-covered trees. Golden and red leaves carpeted the ground, muffling their footsteps. Thora pulled the chain, guiding Gunnar to a hidden clearing she knew from gathering herbs for her mistress. There, away from prying eyes, she finally stopped and turned to face him. "Now what?" The words came out as a whisper. She had no plan, no idea what to do with a warrior she'd bought on impulse. Gunnar raised his chained wrists. "Free me." Thora hesitated, then drew the small knife she carried on her belt. It wasn't big enough to cut the iron chains, but there was a locking mechanism. With clumsy fingers, she worked on the metal until she heard a click. The chains fell to the ground with a dull thud. Gunnar rubbed his bloody wrists where the iron had cut the skin. For a long moment, he simply stood there, testing the freedom of movement, rolling his shoulders and flexing his fingers. Then, with a movement so fast Thora had no time to scream, he grabbed her by the shoulders and pulled her against the nearest tree trunk. His face was inches from hers, his blue eyes burning with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. "Why?" The question came out as a low growl. "Why waste your last coins on a stranger?" Thora tried to pull away, but he was too strong. "Because," she managed to say, "my father died in chains, and I couldn't save him." Something changed in Gunnar's face. The intensity remained, but the anger gave way to something more complex. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a shared pain. He released her, stepping back. "So you bought me out of guilt." "No," Thora corrected, straightening her rumpled tunic. "I bought you because no one deserves to die in the mines, and because I was tired of doing nothing while the world devours the weak." Gunnar studied her for a long moment, as if seeing her for the first time. A small woman, too thin, with tangled brown hair and gray eyes that had seen too much suffering. But there was something else there, a flame of stubbornness, a refusal to bend that he recognized from his own days as a free warrior. "You have nowhere to go," he stated, not a question. Thora shook her head. "Neither do you," she replied. He smiled for the first time, a joyless expression that revealed a broken tooth. "True." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind in the trees and the distant caw of ravens. Ravens. Gunnar looked up at the sky, where two blackbirds circled above the clearing. "Hugin and Munin," he murmured. "Odin's eyes watch us." A shiver ran down Thora's spine. Her father had been devoted to the Allfather, making offerings even when they barely had food. And now 2 ravens appeared when she was most lost. Coincidence or omen? Gunnar lowered his gaze, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a decision made. "By the old law," he said, "you bought me. That makes me your thrall. But by the same law, I can claim compensation. You freed me from chains, so I owe you a blood debt." Thora frowned, not fully understanding. "What does that mean?" "It means," Gunnar answered, "that by the custom of our people I claim you. As wife, if you accept, or as a ward under my axe, if you prefer. But either way, from this moment, your life and mine are bound." The world seemed to stop. Thora looked at the warrior before her. Torn clothes, dried blood, homeless, weaponless, with nothing but wounded pride and muscles trained to kill. He was offering protection he could barely give, in exchange for a freedom she had granted expecting nothing in return. It was madness, but looking into his eyes, Thora saw something that made her hesitate. Honor. The same honor her father had possessed, the refusal to live without dignity even when life offered only chains. "I accept," the words came out before she could weigh all the consequences. Gunnar nodded, as if there had never been any doubt. "Then by the pact of iron and blood, witnessed by Odin's ravens, I, Gunnar Eriksson, claim you as mine." He took her knife, cut his own palm and then hers. Blood ran as he pressed their palms together. "What was yours is mine. What was mine is yours, until hell claims us or Valhalla calls." It was an ancient oath, older than the Christianity beginning to infect the northern lands. A pact recognized by the gods, sealed in blood under the eyes of ravens. Thora felt the heat of his blood mixing with hers, and something changed in the air around them. The ravens cawed loudly, then flew south, disappearing among the trees. The wind carried a whisper that sounded almost like laughter. Odin had witnessed. Now it remained to be discovered whether this was a blessing or a curse. Night fell quickly over the woods. Gunnar gathered dry branches while Thora prepared a small fire using the flint she carried. The flames cast dancing shadows on their faces. creating a fragile circle of light against the closing darkness. The blood on their palms had dried, forming a brown crust that stung slightly. Thora watched the warrior sitting across the fire, studying his features in the unsteady light of the flames. Now that the adrenaline from the market had passed, reality began to weigh on her. She had sworn union with a complete stranger. Gunnar broke the silence first, his voice low so as not to travel too far through the trees. "You know my name, but not my story." Thora nodded. He fed the fire with another branch before continuing. "I served as a warrior in Jarl Torsten's band. We sailed to the lands of the Rus seeking silver and glory. The campaign began well. We raided 3 settlements, filled our ships with furs and amber. But Torsten grew greedy. He wanted to attack a well-defended fortification on the Divina River. The battle was a massacre. The enemy waited for us with archers on the walls and cavalry hidden in the forests." Gunnar touched the scar on his eyebrow, the cut still fresh. "We fought for hours. I watched my shield brothers fall one by one. Torsten died with a spear through his chest, still shouting orders as he drowned in his own blood. Of the 40 men who entered the battle, only 6 survived, and those 6 were captured and sold as thralls." Thor listened in silence, imagining the horror of that battle. Gunnar continued, his eyes fixed on the flames as if he could see the memories dancing there. "The other 5 were sold quickly. They were young, obedient, broken by defeat. But I," he laughed without humor, "refused to bow. So they whipped me. When that didn't work, they tried to sell me for hard labor. No one wanted me. Until you." He raised his eyes to meet hers. "Why did you really buy me, Thora? The truth this time." She hesitated, then decided a man with whom she'd sealed a blood pact deserved honesty. "I saw my father in you, the same pride that led him to be falsely accused and dragged away in chains. The same refusal to break that killed him in the mines. I bought you because..." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Because if I could save one man from the fate that killed my father, perhaps the pain would lessen. Perhaps it would mean he didn't die completely in vain." Gunnar nodded slowly, as if the answer made sense to him. "Was your father a warrior?" "A farmer," Thora replied. "We raised sheep in the hills to the north. We had a small piece of land, but it was ours. Until Jarl Svein decided he wanted our pastures. He planted his own cattle on our land, then accused my father of theft. No one dared contradict a Jarl." Thora felt the old anger burn in her chest. "They took my father in chains. My mother died of grief before winter, and I was sold as a servant to pay the false debts." Her story echoed in the silence of the woods. Gunnar threw another branch on the fire, making the flames crackle loudly. "Jarl Svein of where? Hedeby?" "No," Thora answered. "From Ribe, 3 days' travel north." Gunnar memorized the name. Thora could see it in his eyes. Viking warriors never forgot an injustice. Blood vengeance was sacred, an obligation that transcended generations. They took turns sleeping that night, Gunnar insisting on taking the first watch despite obvious exhaustion. Thora awoke at dawn to the sound of movement nearby. She sat up quickly, her heart racing, but it was only Gunnar returning from among the trees. He carried a dead rabbit and several herbs she recognized as edible. "Did you hunt with your bare hands?" "Stones," he corrected, showing several smooth stones he had collected. "Experienced thrower when I don't have a bow." They ate the roasted rabbit in silence, dividing the lean meat. It was the first decent meal Thora had had in days, and her stomach protested the sudden abundance. Gunnar ate methodically, like a soldier accustomed to taking advantage of food when available. "We need to move," he said when finished. "Hedeby isn't safe. Your former employers may decide you stole property by disappearing, and my captors might realize I was sold too cheaply and come seeking compensation." "Where will we go?" Thora asked. Gunnar looked north. "I know a man in Ribe, Bjorn the blacksmith. We fought together before I served Torsten. If he still lives, he'll give us temporary shelter." The mention of Ribe made Thora shiver. The land of Jarl Svein. Gunnar noticed her reaction. "The Jarl who destroyed your family lives there?" She nodded. "Even better," Gunnar said with a cold smile. "Debts must be paid, in blood or gold, but always paid." The journey to Ribe would take 3 days walking, possibly 4 with the uncertain autumn weather. They had no provisions beyond what they could hunt, no weapons besides Thora's small knife, no money. but Gunnar seemed confident as they extinguished the fire and covered the traces of their camp. He had survived battles, slavery, and beatings. A 3-day walk was nothing in comparison. They followed hunting trails through the forest, avoiding the main roads where bandits and Jarl's patrols might find them. Gunnar moved with the silent efficiency of a predator, teaching Thora to step where leaves wouldn't make noise, to recognize signs of danger in the forest. He pointed out fresh wolf tracks in the mud. "Large pack," he commented. 7, maybe 8 animals. We'll avoid this area at dusk. On the second day, they met another traveler, an old man bent under the weight of a large bundle, walking in the same direction. He wore a worn cloak and leaned on a gnarled wooden staff. When he saw them, he stopped and raised a hand in greeting. Gunnar immediately positioned himself between Thora and the stranger, tense and alert. The old man smiled, a crooked smile that revealed few teeth. "Peace, young warrior. I'm just an old wanderer looking for company on the road." There was something familiar about that face, Thora thought, but she couldn't identify what. The old man had only one eye, the left covered by a worn leather patch. His right eye was a piercing blue, impossible to ignore. "You travel to Ribe?" he asked, his voice hoarse but curiously strong for someone so old. Gunnar hesitated, then nodded. "May I accompany you? The roads aren't safe for an old man alone. Wolves, you know, both the 4-legged and 2-legged kind." Something in his voice made Thora shiver, but Gunnar agreed. Safety in numbers. The old man joined them, introducing himself as Grimnir, a seller of stories who traveled from village to village trading sagas for food and shelter. He spoke incessantly as they walked, telling stories of gods and heroes, of ancient battles and modern betrayals. His voice had a hypnotic quality, making the hours pass faster. At nightfall, they camped in a clearing protected by large rocks. Grimnir contributed hard bread and cheese from his bundle, sharing generously. As they ate, he told the story of how Odin hung himself on Yggdrasil for 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, to gain the knowledge of runes. Thora listened fascinated as the old man described the god's suffering, his voice dropping into somber tones. "Knowledge has a price," Grimnir said, his single eye fixed on Gunnar. "Always has a price." Gunnar reciprocated with stories of his own battles, describing the shield wall that saved his life on more than one occasion, the camaraderie among shield brothers, the taste of mead after victory. Grimnir listened with disconcerting intensity, asking pointed questions that revealed deep knowledge of military tactics. For an old storyteller, he knew much about war. On the 3rd night, when they were only half a day from Rabe, Grimnir woke them urgently. "Wolves," he whispered, a large pack surrounding the camp. Thora heard it then, the low sound of growls circling in the darkness beyond the reach of the dying fire. Gunnar rose immediately, grabbing a thick branch from the fire as an improvised weapon. Thora did the same, her ridiculously small knife trembling in her hand. The wolves emerged from the shadows slowly, their eyes reflecting the firelight in bright yellow points. They were enormous, larger than any wolf Thora had seen. The pack leader was black as night, with a white scar across its snout. It approached with arrogant confidence, growling low. The other wolves flanked it, ready to attack. Grimnir remained seated, curiously calm. "These are not common wolves," he said softly. "They are children of Fenrir, Odin's wolves, sent to test or kill." Gunnar looked at the old man with growing suspicion. "How do you know that?" Grimnir smiled that crooked smile. "Because I sent them." His single eye gleamed with light that didn't come from the fire. "I wanted to see if you are worthy of the destiny the Norns have woven for you. Gunnar Eriksson." The old man stood, and as he rose, something about him changed. He seemed taller, more imposing, and the air around him crackled with power. Thora felt her knees weaken as she recognized who he really was. Odin, the Allfather, the Wanderer, disguised as he always did when testing mortals. The god studied Gunnar with his single eye while the wolves continued circling, their growls filling the night like distant thunder. "You swore loyalty to this woman," Odin said, his voice now resonating with power that made the trees tremble. "A blood pact witnessed by my ravens. But words are easy, Gunnar Eriksson. Actions reveal truth." Gunnar held his position, the burning branch steady in his hands despite the fear Thora could see in his eyes. "What does the Allfather want from us?" Odin gestured to the wolves. "Survive until dawn. Protect each other. If both live, I will grant a blessing. If you die together, I will guarantee passage to Valhalla. But if one abandons the other to save their own life," he said, his eye gleaming with cold fury, "then I will curse that cowardly soul to wander as a draugr for all eternity, without peace, without honor, without rest." Before they could respond, Odin vanished. He simply ceased to be there, like smoke dispersed by the wind. The wolves, however, remained. And now, without the god's presence restraining them, they attacked. The pack leader leapt first, aiming for Gunnar's throat. The warrior sidestepped with the burning branch, making the beast recoil temporarily. Thora spun when she felt movement behind her, her small knife slicing the air. It caught the snout of a gray wolf, making it howl in pain and rage. "Back to back!" Gunnar shouted, positioning himself with his back to hers. Thora obeyed, pressing her back against his. Thus they formed a two-person defensive circle, as warriors did in last stands. Gunnar swung the burning branch in wide arcs, keeping 3 wolves at bay. Thora stabbed and slashed any beast that came too close on her side. The smell of burning fur and blood filled the air. One wolf got past Gunnar's defense, its jaws clamping on the warrior's left arm. Gunnar roared in pain but didn't drop the torch, using it to burn the beast's eyes until it released. Blood flowed from deep wounds on his forearm. Thora felt his body tremble with the impact, but he didn't fall, maintaining his protective position between her and the larger wolves. The battle continued for hours that felt like days. The wolves attacked in waves, testing their defenses, looking for weakness. Gunnar and Thora fought with coordination born of desperate need. When he staggered from exhaustion, she supported him. When she almost fell, he pulled her back. The burning branch burned down to a smoldering stump. Gunnar threw it in the face of the lead wolf and grabbed another from the dying fire. Thora felt her muscles scream, her lungs burn, blood from small cuts and scratches running down her skin. But she didn't think of giving up. She remembered Odin's words. "If one abandons the other." She looked at Gunnar out of the corner of her eye, seeing blood covering half his face from a scalp wound, seeing him favoring his left leg where a wolf had torn his thigh. He could run, she realized. He was fast, strong enough to escape if he left her to the wolves. But he didn't. And she wouldn't flee either. Even when her legs threatened to give way, even when the knife almost slipped from her blood-slick hands, she held her position. They had sealed a blood pact. They had sworn union. And Thora, daughter of a man who preferred to die rather than break his word, would not be the one to break first. The sky began to lighten in the east, a gray line on the horizon. The wolves noticed too. The pack leader, the black beast with the white scar, stopped its attack. It studied Gunnar and Thora with intelligence that was more than animal. Then, slowly, it inclined its head in recognition. The other wolves retreated, following their leader back into the forest darkness. Within moments, they had disappeared, as if they had never existed. Gunnar and Thora remained back to back for a long moment, their bodies trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. Then, slowly, Gunnar's legs gave way. He fell to his knees, the smoldering branch slipping from his fingers. Thora turned and caught him before he fell completely, her small strength barely enough to guide him gently to the ground. "We're alive," she whispered, half laughing, half crying. "We survived." Gunnar looked at her through eyes clouded with pain and blood loss. "You stayed," he said simply. "You could have run when they surrounded me, but you stayed." Thora wiped blood from his face with trembling hands. "An oath is not broken, not when it was sealed in blood." Gunnar smiled, a true expression this time, without bitterness. "Your wife is a warrior, Thora. My father would have liked you." They spent the rest of the dawn treating each other's wounds. Thora tore strips from her own tunic to make bandages, using herbs she recognized to clean the deeper cuts. Gunnar's arm was ugly, the tooth marks deep and bleeding, but no bones seemed broken. His thigh would need stitches they had no means to make, so she bandaged it as tightly as possible, praying infection wouldn't set in. Gunnar treated her scratches with surprising gentleness for hands so large and calloused. She had a deep cut on her shoulder, where claws had torn through fabric and flesh. He cleaned it carefully, then used pine resin to seal the wound. "It will leave a scar," he said. Thora shrugged. "Scars are proof we survived." When the sun finally rose completely, golden and warm over the forest, A mist began to form around the campsite. From the mist, the figure emerged. Odin again, but this time not disguised. He wore silver armor that shone like stars, a cloak as deep blue as the night sky, and held Gungnir, his legendary spear. Ravens perched on his shoulders, Hugin and Munin, watching with eyes that saw past and future. "You passed the test," the god declared. "You showed courage, loyalty, and honor. For that, I grant a blessing." He struck the base of Gungnir on the ground. "Gunnar Eriksson, you will recover what you lost. Name, honor, sword, and shield. But the path will be marked by blood and betrayal. Trust only the one who stood by your side when wolves howled." Odin turned to Thora. "And you, daughter of injustice, you will have vengeance against the one who destroyed your family. But beware, for vengeance has a price. Spilled blood never washes completely clean, only stains new hands. Choose wisely when the time comes." The mist began to swallow the god again. "One last thing," his voice echoed. "Seek the blacksmith in Ribe. Bjorn has something that belongs to Gunnar, kept for years. An inheritance from his true father." The final words made Gunnar freeze. True father? But Odin had disappeared, taking the mist with him. Only the ravens remained a moment longer, cawing once before flying south. Thora touched Gunnar's arm gently. What did he mean by true father? Gunnar shook his head, confusion and something that looked like hope fighting in his expression. "I don't know. I always believed I was the son of Eric the farmer, but perhaps," he hesitated, "perhaps there were secrets my mother took to the grave." They reached Ribe at midday, two ragged, bloodied travelers staggering through the city gates. Guards watched them with suspicion, but didn't stop them. Ribe was larger than Hedeby, its streets wider, its buildings more imposing. Jarl Svein's hall dominated the city center, its roof covered in bronze shining under the sun. Thora felt ancient hatred burn in her chest upon seeing that hall. There lived the man who had destroyed her family, who had sent her father to die in chains, who had taken their lands without remorse. Gunnar must have sensed the tension in her body because he placed a hand on her shoulder. Patience. Hasty vengeance is failed vengeance. First, we find Bjorn. Recover our strength, understand the mystery Odin planted. Then, he promised, we will make Svein pay for every tear he wrung from you. Bjorn's forge was on the southern edge of the city, recognizable by the constant sound of hammer on anvil. The blacksmith was a huge man, shoulders broad from decades of working metal, red beard braided with bronze beads. When Gunnar entered the forge, Bjorn dropped his hammer immediately. His eyes widened, then he roared with joy and pulled Gunnar into a crushing embrace. "By the gods, boy! We thought you died in Torsten's campaign!" Bjorn took them inside his house, a solid wooden structure with a large hearth and well-made furniture. His wife Astrid prepared a hot bath and food while Bjorn listened to Gunnar's story. Captured, sold, bought by Thora, tested by Odin. The blacksmith listened in silence, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. When Gunnar mentioned Odin's final words about inheritance and true father, Bjorn exchanged a look with Astrid. "It's time," Astrid said softly. "He has a right to know." Bjorn nodded heavily, then rose and went to an iron-bound chest locked in the corner of the hall. He opened it with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. From inside, he withdrew something wrapped in oiled cloth. "Your father asked me to keep this," Bjorn said to Gunnar. "Not Eric, the man you called father, but your true father, Hakon, the broken sword." Gunnar paled. Hakon was a legend, a famous warrior who had served King Harald, who had fought in 100 battles, whose name was spoken with reverence in mead halls across the northern lands. "Impossible," Gunnar whispered. "Hakon died without heirs." Bjorn unwrapped the cloth, revealing a sword. The blade gleamed even in the dim light, a perfect pattern of folding running along the steel. The hilt was wrapped in worn leather, the guard simple but elegant, the pommel decorated with an engraved wolf. "Spjot Vinner," Bjorn said reverently. "Wolf spear. Hakon's sword. He gave this to me 23 winters ago, said his true son would reclaim it when the time came. He described you perfectly, Gunnar. The eyes, the scar on your chin that you've had since childhood, even your preference for fighting left-handed with sword and shield." Thora watched Gunnar take the sword with trembling hands. The weapon seemed alive in his grip, perfectly balanced as if it had been forged specifically for him. Perhaps it had. Why? Gunnar asked, his voice hoarse. Why did Håkon never claim me? Why did he let Eric raise me? Bjorn sighed. Håkon was dying, mortally wounded in his last battle. He came to me secretly, said he had a son with a married woman, that the boy would be killed if the truth were revealed. Eric was a good man, agreed to raise you as his own. Håkon died 3 days later, taking the secret. Only I knew, and I swore never to tell until you came seeking your inheritance. Gunnar tested the sword's weight, making experimental cuts in the air. The blade sang, a pure and deadly sound. Thora saw a transformation happen. The defeated warrior, the chained slave, disappeared. In his place stood something more, heir to legend, son of Håkon, man with a destiny. But Bjorn wasn't finished. There's more, he said. Håkon left a message. He said you would have a choice to make. Follow his path, sword and glory and young death in battle, or choose differently. Build something lasting, family and land and peace. He said the gods would give you the opportunity, but the choice would be yours. Thora felt Gunnar's eyes on her, studying her face. That night, after a bath and food and proper treatment of wounds, Thora and Gunnar sat alone in the small room Bjorn had offered. The sword Spjótvinur rested between them, moonlight reflecting on its blade. You are the son of a legend, Thora said softly. You could reclaim a name, gather men, perhaps even become a jarl. Why would you be bound by a promise made to a nameless servant? Gunnar took her hand, pressing it against the scar on his palm where they had sealed the blood pact. Because, he said, you stayed when wolves howled. Because you spent your last coins to save a stranger. Because you have honor that many jarls lack. He pulled her closer. I am Håkon's son, yes, but I am also yours by choice, Thora. And I choose to stay. The kiss was inevitable, tentative at first, then deeper. Thora felt his hands, rough but gentle, tracing her face. She felt the heat of his body, the strength contained in his muscles. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Gunnar rested his forehead against hers. For the first time since her father's death, Thora felt something beyond pain and anger. She felt hope, but hope, she would remember later, always comes with a price. And the price would begin to be collected at dawn. Morning brought an unexpected visitor. Thora awoke to the sound of tense voices coming from the main hall. She rose quickly, putting on her patched tunic, and found Gunnar already standing, hand on Spjótvinur. A man was in Bjorn's hall, accompanied by 6 armed warriors. The man was thin, with a hawk-like face and calculating eyes. He wore fine clothes, an expensive fur cloak, gold rings on every finger. She recognized him immediately. Halvard, Jarl Svein's trusted man. Bjorn the blacksmith, Halvard said in a honeyed voice. I've heard interesting rumors. They say you harbor fugitives, a warrior slave who disappeared from Hedeby and a thieving servant who owes compensation to her former masters. Bjorn crossed his arms, posture defiant. I see no fugitives here, only guests under the protection of my roof. Hospitality is sacred, Halvard. Even Svein should remember that. The Jarl's name made Thora shiver, but she forced herself to remain calm. Halvard noticed her reaction, a cold smile curling his lips. Ah, you must be the girl, Thora, daughter of the thief. No, Thora corrected, keeping her voice firm. Daughter of the honorable man your master destroyed with lies. Halvard laughed, a humorless sound. Honorable? Your father stole cattle. He was tried by the Thing and found guilty. Justice was served. Lies, Thora spat. Svein planted his own cattle on our land. No witness dared speak against a jarl. Halvard shrugged. Prove it. Thora felt anger burn but knew he was right. Without proof, without witnesses willing to speak, it was just her word against a jarl's. And the word of jarls always won. Gunnar stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Thora. And me? What accusations do you bring against me? Halvard studied him with new interest. None yet. But I wonder, who exactly are you to carry a sword like that? Your clothes are a thrall's, but your eyes are a warrior's. Gunnar didn't answer, just tightened his grip on Spjótvinur. Bjorn intervened before tension exploded into violence. Halvard, did you come here to make accusations or have real business? I'm busy and my forge doesn't heat itself. Halvard smiled that predator's smile. Actually, I come with a proposal from Jarl Svein. He needs warriors for an expedition south. Good pay, share of loot, honor, and glory. We seek capable men. His eyes fixed on Gunnar again. Men who know how to hold a sword. It was a trap. Thora realized immediately. If Gunnar accepted, he would be under Svein's command, obligated to obey. If he refused, it would raise suspicions. Gunnar must have realized it too because he hesitated, calculating options. Before he could answer, a new voice cut through the tension. He already has employment. The voice came from the door. A man entered, tall and imposing, with graying braided hair and an equally graying beard. He wore expensive mail and carried a large axe on his back. Thora didn't know him, but Bjorn clearly did, because the blacksmith tensed. Jarl Eirik, Bjorn said, inclining his head in cautious respect. I didn't expect your visit. Eirik the Grey, Jarl of lands east of Ribe, entered the hall as if it were his own. His warriors remained outside, but his presence alone filled the space. He ignored Halvard completely, focusing on Gunnar. I heard Haakon's son was in Ribe. I came to see if the rumors were true. The hall fell deathly silent. Halvard's eyes widened. Haakon's son? Haakon the Broken Sword. Eirik nodded, still studying Gunnar. I knew your father. We fought side by side in 3 campaigns. He was the best warrior I've ever seen. He told me, before he died, that he had a son hidden. A boy with wolf's eyes and a heart of iron. He described you perfectly, young man. Gunnar straightened his shoulders, meeting the Jarl's gaze without flinching. I am Gunnar, son of Haakon. Raised as Eirik's son, but now knowing my true blood. Eirik smiled, an expression of approval. Your father saved my life twice. I owe him a blood debt. I will offer what he couldn't give you. Land, men, a position in my band. Come serve me, and you'll have the honor your name deserves. It was a generous offer, Thora knew, more than a common warrior could dream of. Land meant wealth. Position meant respect. Serving a powerful Jarl like Eirik opened doors to a glorious future. But it also meant leaving Ribe, leaving unfinished vengeance against Svein, leaving, perhaps, her own self. Thora forced herself to show no emotion, but inside her heart sank. Gunnar looked at her, his eyes asking a silent question. Thora knew she should encourage him to accept. It was his chance to rebuild a life, reclaim his legacy. But selfishly, desperately, she wanted him to stay. Before she could decide what to do, Halvard spoke. Jarl Eirik, with respect, there are complications. This woman, he pointed at Thora, owes compensation to her former masters in Hedeby, and there are questions about stolen property. What property? Eirik asked, his voice sharp. Thora took a deep breath. I bought Gunnar at the Hedeby slave market with my last 3 coins, legally and witnessed. Then I freed him. There is no theft. Halvard scoffed. Your employers say different. They say you fled owing work, that the thrall was too valuable to be sold so cheaply. Eirik turned to Halvard, a dangerous expression. Do you question a legal transaction, or are you just looking for an excuse to cause trouble? The tension between the 2 Jarls, even one being the other's representative, was palpable. Bjorn took advantage of the distraction. I have records of the sale, he lied smoothly. Everything legal according to law. Halvard couldn't contradict without proof, and everyone knew it. He retreated, but Thora saw a promise of vengeance in his eyes. This isn't over, he said. Jarl Svein will hear about this. Then he left, his warriors following. When they were alone with Eirik, the Jarl turned his attention to Gunnar. My offer stands, but I see you have complications here. Does this woman mean something to you? Gunnar didn't hesitate. She is my wife. We sealed a blood pact witnessed by Odin. Eirik raised his eyebrows, impressed. A high oath. Then bring both. I have land enough for a young couple to start. Gunnar looked at Thora again. It was a decision that affected them both. Thora thought quickly. Going with Eirik meant security, a future, a life away from Ribe and painful memories, but it also meant abandoning vengeance, leaving Svein unpunished for what he did to her father. Could she live with that? Should she ask Gunnar to sacrifice opportunity because of her thirst for vengeance? Before she could answer, the door opened violently. One of Bjorn's warriors entered running, face pale. Jarl Eirik, there's trouble. Your men outside have been surrounded by Svein's guards. A messenger says Svein demands your presence in his hall. Now. Eric frowned. What kind of game is Svein playing? He wouldn't be so foolish to challenge me openly. But that was exactly what Svein was doing, they discovered. When Eirik went out, accompanied by Gunnar and Bjorn, they found his warriors surrounded by at least 20 of Svein's men. At the center was the Jarl himself. Svein was a fat man with a red face of someone who drank too much and ate even better. But his eyes were cold and calculating, proving that underestimating him would be a fatal mistake. "Eirik, old friend," Svein called, his voice falsely cheerful. "I hear you're trying to recruit in my lands without my permission. Very rude." Eirik remained calm. "I came seeking a warrior who owes service to his family. Nothing more." Svein laughed. "Ah, yes, the supposed son of Hakon. Convenient, isn't it? Appearing out of nowhere with a famous sword and claiming inheritance. How do we know he's not an imposter?" Thora realized Svein's plan immediately. He couldn't attack Eirik directly without causing war between Jarls, but he could question Gunnar's legitimacy, create doubt, perhaps even accuse him of stealing the sword. Gunnar, however, remained calm. "Bjorn the blacksmith kept Spjótvinur by Hakon's order. He can testify." Svein waved dismissively. "Bjorn is your friend. He would obviously lie for you. We need real proof." "What kind of proof?" Eirik asked, his voice dangerous. Svein smiled. "Holmgang. Ritual duel. If Gunnar is truly Hakon's son, he'll prove it with blood. My champion will fight him. If he wins, I'll accept his claim. If he loses, well, the sword will be confiscated as stolen property and he'll be executed for fraud." It was an elaborate trap. Holmgang was sacred. Refusing would admit cowardice or fraud. But Gunnar was still wounded from Odin's wolves, barely recovered, against Svein's rested, well-armed champion. Eirik began to protest. "This is absurd, Svein. You have no authority to—" "I accept," Gunnar interrupted. "I will fight your Holmgang. I will prove my blood with your champion's blood." Thora grabbed his arm. "You're still injured." Gunnar covered her hand with his. "Trust me, I can't refuse without dishonor. And honor," he smiled sadly, "is all Hakon's son has." The Holmgang was set for midday, giving Gunnar few hours to prepare. Svein revealed his champion as everyone gathered at the duel arena, a circle marked with stones outside the city walls. The champion was a monster of a man called Ulf the Bloody, tall as a bear, wide as a door, with scars covering every inch of exposed skin. He carried a huge axe and an iron-reinforced shield. He had killed 12 men in Holmgang, they said. Everyone was betting on him. Gunnar looked small in comparison, still favoring his wounded leg, his arm bandaged where wolves had bitten. Thora helped him put on the mail shirt Bjorn had lent. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the straps. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "We could flee. Go to Eirik's lands tonight." Gunnar took her face in his hands. "And live as a coward? Always looking back? Always with the shadow of dishonor? No." He kissed her forehead. "Trust that Odin didn't test me just to let me fall now." But Thora didn't have that much faith. She watched with a sinking heart as Gunnar entered the circle, Spjótvinur in his right hand, a borrowed shield in his left. Ulf entered from the opposite side, confident and smiling. The rules of Holmgang were declared. Fight to death or surrender. Leaving the circle meant defeat. Begin at the signal of the Gode, Odin's priest supervising the duel. The Gode raised his rune staff. "May Odin judge the true. May Thor bless the strong. May the Norns witness destiny. Fight." Ulf attacked immediately, his axe descending in a deadly arc. Gunnar dodged, his wounded leg almost giving way. The axe struck the ground where he had been a second before, raising dirt. Ulf recovered quickly, attacking again. Gunnar blocked with his shield, the impact sending waves of pain through his wounded arm. Thora watched horrified as Gunnar retreated under Ulf's brutal assault. The huge man pressed without mercy, each axe stroke capable of splitting Gunnar in half. Gunnar dodged, blocked, retreated, but didn't attack. He was waiting, Thora realized, letting Ulf tire, studying his pattern. It was a risky tactic when he was already injured. Then it happened. Ulf swung the axe laterally, a stroke that should have decapitated. Gunnar didn't block. He dropped to his knees, letting the blade pass over his head by inches. And as he fell, he thrust upward with Spjótvinur. The sword found the opening under Ulf's arm, where the mail had a gap. It went deep, between ribs, piercing lung. Ulf staggered back. eyes wide in shock. Blood foamed on his lips. He tried to raise the axe again, but strength abandoned him. He fell to his knees, then face down on the ground, dead before he stopped falling. The circle fell silent. Then Eric roared approval. "Hakon's son indeed! Well fought!" Others began to applaud, even some of Svein's men looking impressed despite themselves. Gunnar rose slowly, wiping Spjótvinur on the grass before sheathing. He looked at Svein. "Satisfied, Jarl? Have I proved my blood?" Svein was red with anger, but couldn't deny the result. Holmgang was sacred. A stiff nod. "Your claim is accepted." But then his gaze slid to Thora, and she saw something dangerous there. A plan forming. That night, they celebrated victory in Bjorn's hall. Eric provided mead and pork, celebrating Gunnar as a shield brother. Thora should have been happy, but she couldn't shake a feeling of dread. Svein had yielded too easily. Men like him didn't accept defeat without retaliation. Her suspicion was confirmed the next morning. Thora awoke alone. Gunnar had disappeared. She ran to the hall, finding Bjorn and Eirik already awake, faces somber. "Svein's messenger came during the night," Bjorn said. "Summoned Gunnar for private negotiation. Alone." Thora felt ice in her veins. "And he went? Why?" Eric handed her a piece of parchment. The message was written in crude runes. If Gunnar wanted Thora to stay safe, he should appear alone at Svein's hall at dawn. If he didn't come, Svein would use his position as Jarl to formally accuse Thora of theft. She would be tried, condemned, perhaps executed. It was pure blackmail. "That fool," Eric growled. "He's walking right into a trap. We have to go get him." He gathered his men, but when they reached Svein's hall, they found the gates closed and guards in battle formation. Svein appeared on the walls, smiling victoriously. "Gunnar is here, under my protection," he announced. "He accepted my offer to serve me. In return, I've forgiven all accusations against his woman. Everyone's happy." "Lies!" Thora screamed. "Gunnar would never serve you willingly." Svein shrugged. "Ask him yourself." Gunnar was brought to the walls. Even from a distance, Thora could see new marks on him. Not battle wounds, torture wounds. He had been beaten, broken. His eyes met hers across the distance, and she saw a devastating truth there. Sorry, pain, and something more. A silent command. "Run." Gunnar spoke, his voice hoarse but audible. "I accept serving Jarl Svein, of my own will. My wife is free of all accusations." The words were right, but Thora knew the truth. Svein had tortured him, threatened him, possibly threatened her too. Gunnar had chosen slavery to save her, and by law, there was nothing they could do. If a warrior swore service voluntarily, even under coercion that couldn't be proved, the oath was binding. Eirik tried to protest, but Svein had won. Legally, he had merely accepted a warrior into his service. That Gunnar had been coerced couldn't be proved. Eirik was forced to retreat, promising Thora he would do what he could, but both knew it was an empty promise. Thora stood looking at the walls of Svein's hall long after others had left, staring at the place where Gunnar had disappeared, the man she had bought with her last coins, the man who had sworn to protect her, the man now in chains again, this time by choice, her choice, because if she had never come to Ribi, never sought vengeance against Svein, Gunnar would be free. He was in chains because of her. The irony was bitter. She had saved him from the slave market only to see him enslaved again. And this time, she didn't have 3 silver coins to save him. She had nothing except hatred burning in her heart and a promise she made to herself. Svein would pay. Somehow, some way she would make that cursed Jarl pay for every tear, every drop of blood, every moment of suffering, even if it cost her own life. 3 moons passed since Svein had imprisoned Gunnar. 3 moons of torment for Thora. Knowing he was alive but out of reach, forced to serve the man who had destroyed her family. Eirik offered shelter in his lands, but she refused. She remained in Ribe, working again as a servant, this time at a tavern near the market. Humble work, but it gave her what she needed. Information. Taverns were where tongues loosened, especially tongues of Svein's warriors when mead flowed freely. Thora served drink and food, keeping her head down, listening to everything. She learned Gunnar was alive, kept in chains in the hall's dungeon. She learned Svein occasionally displayed him at feasts. Hakon's son now reduced to a thrall, a symbol of the Jarl's power. She learned Gunnar hadn't broken, that he still maintained defiant silence even under regular lashings. Each piece of information was a knife in her heart. But Thora swallowed the pain, kept serving, kept listening, waiting. Because there was more. Rumors that Svein planned a southern expedition in spring, that he would leave Ribe poorly defended, that he would take his best warriors, but leave the thralls behind. It was an opportunity. Thor just needed to survive until spring. Bjorn visited when he could, bringing food and words of encouragement. Eirik sent messengers offering ransom for Gunnar, but Svein refused all. The Jarl was savoring his victory, rubbing Eirik's humiliation in his face. It was a matter of pride now, a dispute between Jarls using Gunnar as a pawn. Thora hated every moment of powerlessness, but forced herself to wait. Hasty vengeance is failed vengeance. Gunnar's words echoed in her mind. Spring arrived with thaw and first flowers, and with it, confirmation. Svein gathered 50 warriors for a raid south. Rumors said he would attack a rich monastery, return loaded with silver and Christian slaves. He would leave in 3 days. Thora finally acted. She went to Bjorn at night, when streets were empty. The blacksmith received her in his forge, fire still warm from the day's work. "I need your help," Thora said without preamble. "I need to get into Svein's hall when he leaves." Bjorn frowned. "Impossible. Even with Svein gone, there are guards, and the dungeon where they keep Gunnar is locked. Only Halvard has the key." Halvard would stay to administer Reba in Svein's absence. "Then," Thora said, voice firm despite fear, "I'll need Halvard's key." Bjorn studied her for a long moment. "What are you planning?" "Girl?" Thor met his gaze. "I'm getting my husband back, and I'm making Svein pay for everything he took from me." Bjorn sighed, then went to his chest. He withdrew something small and shining. A dagger, finely forged, short blade, but deadly. "Belonged to my daughter," he said softly. "Died of fever 5 winters ago. She would have liked you." Thora accepted the dagger with reverence. "Thank you." Bjorn shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. Getting Halvard's key won't be easy, but I know someone who might help. A woman named Ragnhild works as a servant in Svein's hall. Was a friend of your father's, actually. She might remember you." 2 days later, Thora found Ragnhild at the market. The woman was older, graying hair but sharp eyes. She recognized Thora immediately. "Little Thora," she whispered, "you've grown. Your father would be proud." Thora swallowed emotion. "Ragnhild, I need help. I need to get into the dungeon when Svein leaves." The older woman nodded slowly. "I know what Svein did to your family. I know it's injustice. I'll help." The plan was simple but dangerous. Ragnhild would put sleeping herbs in Halvard's wine the night Svein left. While he slept, Thora would enter the hall through storage tunnels Ragnhild had access to. She would take the key, free Gunnar, flee before anyone noticed. Simple, except for 1,000 things that could go wrong. The night of departure arrived. Thora watched from afar as Svein and his warriors marched through Reba's gates, banners fluttering, weapons shining under morning sun. The Jarl was radiant, confident in his strength. He didn't look back. Why would he? Ribe was his. Gunnar was his. Everything was his. But pride, Thora knew, came before the fall. She waited until midnight. Then, wearing dark clothes, Bjorn's dagger hidden in her belt, she went to the tunnel entrance Ragnhild had shown. The tunnel was narrow, damp, smelling of earth and mold. Crawling through it took an eternity, knees and hands scraping on stone. But eventually she emerged in a storage cellar of Svein's hall, among beer barrels and grain sacks. Ragnhild was waiting, face pale in candlelight. "It worked," she whispered. "Halvard sleeps like the dead, but guards still patrol. You have to be quick." Thora nodded. "Where's the key?" "In his room, 3rd floor." Ragnhild handed her another candle. "May the gods protect you." Climbing the hall's stairs at night was like crossing Helheim. Every creak of wood sounded loud as thunder. Every shadow seemed to hide a guard. But Thora forced herself to continue, thinking of Gunnar chained below, waiting. She wouldn't fail him again. Halvard's room was locked, but the lock was simple. Thora used a hairpin to pick it, a technique she'd learned watching thieves at the tavern. Inside, Halvard snored loudly, mouth open, empty wine bottles scattered around. Ragnhild's herbs had done their work. The key was on a chain around his neck. Thora approached slowly, each step measured, her heart beating so loud she was sure he'd wake. Halvard stirred, mumbling something unintelligible. Thora froze. Then, when he settled, she reached out and gently lifted the chain. The key was cold and heavy. She used the dagger to carefully cut the chain. The metal gave way with a soft click. Halvard didn't wake. With the key in hand, Thora retreated from the room. Almost at the door, her foot hit an empty bottle. The glass rolled, clinking against others. Halvard grunted, turning. His eyes opened, still blurred from sleep and drug, but opened. He saw Thora, saw the key in her hand. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Halvard opened his mouth to scream. Thora didn't think, just acted. She leapt onto the bed, hand covering his mouth. He tried to push her off, but the herbs had left him weak, slow. They fought silently, Halvard trying to reach the dagger at her waist, Thora trying to keep him quiet. Her fingers found his throat. She squeezed. Halvard scratched at her hands, tried to breathe. Eyes wide in panic, Thora squeezed tighter, thinking of her father dead in the mines, of Gunnar in chains, of all the injustices this man had helped Svein perpetrate. "This is for my father," she whispered. "This is for everyone you helped destroy." It took time, more time than she thought. But eventually, Halvard's struggle weakened, stopped. His eyes glazed over, fixed. Thora released, recoiling, hands trembling. She had killed a man. Not in battle, not in fair self-defense. Cold murder. Something inside her changed in that moment. A line had been crossed that could never be undone. But there was no time for remorse. She took the dagger from Halvard's waist as a backup, then ran from the room. Down the stairs hurriedly, through corridors, to the door leading to the dungeon. The lock was large, ornate. The key fit perfectly. Turned with resistance, then clicked. The door opened. The dungeon was darkness. Thora descended stone stairs carefully, candle casting dancing shadows on damp walls. The smell was horrible. Urine, feces, blood, despair. Cells lined both sides of the corridor. Most empty. But in the last one, she found him. Gunnar was chained to the wall, wrists and ankles bound by heavy iron. His body was thin. Muscles now too prominent, ribs visible. Fresh whip marks crossed his back. One eye was swollen shut, but when he saw her, his other eye widened in shock. "Thora?" His voice was hoarse from disuse. "You shouldn't be here." "Shut up and let me free you," Thora said, already working on the chains. There were smaller locks here, needing different keys. Thora cursed, searching through the ring she'd taken from Halvard. Where were the right keys? Gunnar watched her, expression a mixture of hope and fear. "Thora, if we're caught, Svein will kill you." "I don't care," she replied, finally finding the right key. "I won't leave you here." The first chain opened, freeing Gunnar's left wrist. Then the right. Gunnar rubbed his bloody wrists, circulation returning painfully. Thora worked on the ankle chains, faster now, with practice. Finally, the last one opened. Gunnar was free. He tried to stand, but his legs betrayed him. 3 moons in chains had stolen his strength. Thora held him up, supporting his weight despite being much smaller. "We can do this," she said. "Together." Gunnar nodded, leaning on her. Slowly, painfully, they began the climb back. They reached the ground floor without encountering guards. Ragnhild must have put sleeping herbs in more drinks than just Halvard's. Thora guided Gunnar through the hall toward the storage cellar and escape tunnel. They were almost there when a door opened behind them. A guard entered, staggering from sleep but conscious enough to see 2 fugitives. "Alarm!" he began to shout. "Prisoner escape!" Gunnar pushed Thora ahead. "Go! I'll hold them!" "No!" Thora tried to pull him, but he was firm. "Go, Thora. Get out while you can. I'll catch up." A lie. Both knew. He could barely walk, let alone fight. He was sending her away to save her. Thora made a decision in a fraction of a second. She pushed Gunnar toward the storage cellar, then turned and ran in the opposite direction. "Here!" she shouted at the guard. "I'm here!" Her distraction worked. The guard, confused, chased after her instead of Gunnar. More guards arrived, awakened by the alarm. Thora ran through the hall, leading them away from the cellar. She needed to give Gunnar time to escape through the tunnel. She reached the main hall before they caught her. Tables and chairs offered temporary cover. Thora overturned them, creating an improvised barricade. Guards surrounded her, 6 men armed with swords and spears. She had only Halvard's dagger. There was no way out. The guard captain advanced, sword pointed at her. "Surrender, and your death will be quick." Thora spat at his feet. "I'd rather die standing than live on my knees." The captain frowned. "As you wish." He signaled his men to attack. Then something impossible happened. Thunder roared through the hall despite the clear sky outside. A cold wind swept through the windows, extinguishing all torches. In the sudden darkness, blue light began to glow, and from the light, a figure emerged. It was a Valkyrie, silver armor shining with its own light, raven wings spread, spear in hand. Her face was beautiful and terrible, eyes like ice stones. The guards recoiled, terrified. Even Thora was left breathless. The Valkyrie spoke, voice echoing like a war chant. "Odin Allfather sent me. This woman fought with courage, remained loyal when tested, spilled blood to save the one she loves. Her story does not end here." The Valkyrie pointed her spear at Thora. "Rise, daughter of courage. Your fight has only just begun." Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished. Light disappeared. Thunder silenced. But something had changed. The guards were on their knees, refusing to look at Thora. The captain whispered prayers to Odin, terrified of having nearly killed someone under divine protection. Thora didn't wait for explanations. She ran from the hall, through the streets of Rab, now awakening with commotion. She found Bjorn waiting outside the city with 2 horses. Gunnar was already mounted on one, barely able to stay upright. His face lit up when he saw Thora. "Thought I'd lost you," he said. Thora mounted the second horse with Bjorn's help. "You don't get rid of me that easily." They rode through the night, putting distance between them and Ribe. At dawn, they stopped to rest in a dense forest. Gunnar fell from his horse, exhausted beyond endurance. Thora caught him again, gentle as she laid him under trees. He looked at her with an expression that melted her heart. "You came for me," he whispered. "Against an army, against a jarl, against everything." Thora touched his face, careful with the bruises. "Always," she promised. "I'll always come for you." Gunnar pulled her into a kiss, desperate and relieved and promising. When they separated, he murmured against her lips, "The Valkyrie. You saw her?" Thora nodded. "Odin still watches us, still weaves our destiny." Gunnar laughed weakly. "Then may he weave well, because after this, Svein won't rest until he kills us." He closed his eyes, exhaustion finally claiming him. Thora stood guard while he slept, dagger in hand. Far away, ravens cawed, 2 of them circling high, Hugin and Munin. Odin's eyes still watching. Approving or judging, she didn't know. But she had crossed a line. She had killed. She had defied a jarl. She had seen a Valkyrie and survived. The path ahead would be bloody. Svein would come with vengeance, but Thora would flee no more. She had promised vengeance for her father. She had promised to protect Gunnar. And she would see both promises fulfilled, even if it cost everything, even if the gods demanded the final price. She was ready to pay. Eirik found them 2 days later, his trackers following the trails Thora and Gunnar left in their desperate flight. The Jarl brought physicians, food, fresh horses. Gunnar was treated by an experienced healer who applied salves to his wounds and bandaged broken ribs they hadn't noticed. Thora also received care. The marks on her hands from strangling Halvard cleaned and bandaged. Eirik listened to everything that had happened. His expression grew darker with each revelation. When Thora finished, describing the Valkyrie and miraculous escape, the Jarl fell silent for a long time. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy. "Svein will return from his raid in 2 weeks, perhaps 3. When he discovers Halvard is dead and Gunnar escaped, he will come after you with all his power. I cannot protect you in my lands without risking open war between us." Gunnar, still weak but regaining strength quickly with adequate food and rest, nodded understanding. "We don't ask you to risk your people for us." Eirik, however, smiled. "I haven't finished. I cannot protect you as refugees, but I can as allies. I will gather men who have also suffered Svein's injustices, lesser jarls he has disrespected, farmers whose lands he stole, families he destroyed. There are more like you than you think. You're proposing war, Thora said slowly. Eric shook his head. I'm proposing justice. Svein has gone too far for too long. He uses his position as Jarl to tyrannize those he should protect. It's time to call him to answer for his crimes. We will make a formal challenge at the Thing. Evidence will be presented. If he refuses to answer, then yes, there will be war. The Thing was the ancient assembly where disputes were resolved, laws declared, Jarls judged by their peers. It happened once a year at the sacred stone beyond Ryba. Svein couldn't refuse to attend without absolute dishonor. It was a chance, small, dangerous, but a chance for real justice. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Eric sent messengers throughout all the northern lands, gathering those with grievances against Svein. More responded than they expected. Farmers whose cattle had been stolen, merchants forced to pay illegal tolls, families torn apart by false accusations. Dozens of stories, all painting a picture of a corrupt Jarl who used power for personal greed. Gunnar regained strength slowly, training with Eric's warriors despite the healers' protests. Spjotvinr sang again in his hands, his father's sword feeling more and more like an extension of his own arm. He taught Thora to fight properly, not just desperate slashes, but real technique. She was quick, they discovered, compensating for lack of strength with speed and cunning. At night, lying together under furs in a room Eirik provided. Gunnar and Thora talked about the future. If they survived the Thing, if Svein were deposed, what would they do? Gunnar wanted land of his own, a place to build a hall, raise a family. Thora wanted peace after years of struggle and loss, but both knew peace had a price, and they didn't yet know if they could pay it. Ragnhild arrived one night, having fled Ryb when Halvard's body was discovered. She brought bad news. Svein had returned from his raid, enriched with silver from a plundered monastery. When he discovered Halvard dead and Gunnar gone, he flew into a rage. He had burned 3 farms of people he suspected of aiding the escape, swore to kill Thora slowly, make Gunnar watch, then feed him to the wolves. The news of the burned farms hit Thora like a physical blow. Innocent people suffering for her actions, the price of her vengeance being paid in others' blood. Gunnar held her when she cried, whispering it wasn't her fault, that Svein alone was responsible for his own cruelty. But Thora knew the truth. Every action had a cost, and this one was growing beyond what she had imagined. The day of the Thing arrived under a gray sky threatening storm. The sacred stone stood in an open field surrounded by ancient forest. Hundreds were already gathered when Eric arrived with his group. Jarls from all over the region, their bands of warriors, farmers, and traders, come to watch justice being done or denied. Svein was there, sitting in a high chair as if he were a king. 50 warriors surrounded him, well-armed and threatening. When he saw Gunnar and Thora, his face turned red with anger. He rose, voice raised for all to hear. That man is a fugitive. That woman is a murderer. I arrest them in the name of the law. His warriors advanced, but Eric and his men blocked the path. They are under my protection, Eric declared, and they bring accusations against you, Svein, accusations that will be heard by the Thing before any arrest happens. Svein scoffed. Accusations from a fugitive thrall and a murderess? The Thing doesn't waste time on that. But the Gothi, the elder priest of Odin overseeing the Thing, raised his rune staff. All have the right to speak at the Thing, rich or poor, free or thrall. So say the ancient laws. Speak your accusations, young man. Gunnar stepped forward, Spjotvinr in its sheath but visible to all. I accuse Jarl Svein of multiple crimes against the laws of our people, theft of land through false accusations, murder through unjust slavery, torture of a free man without trial. He looked at Thora. And destruction of an honorable family through lies and greed. Lies! Svein roared. Prove your accusations! Gunnar gestured. Ragnhild stepped forward, followed by others. One by one, witnesses spoke. Ragnhild testified about Svein's cattle being planted on Thora's father's land. A farmer described how Svein had stolen his land through false debts. A merchant spoke of illegal tolls and threats. A warrior who had served Svein, conscience finally overcoming fear, confessed to tortures and murders carried out by the Jarl's order. The evidence piled up. The crowd's murmur grew. Even other Jarls, initially skeptical, began looking at Svein with suspicion. Svein felt control slipping. He stood up, knocking over his chair. This is a conspiracy. Eric wants my lands, uses these liars as an excuse. I demand trial by combat. Let the gods decide truth through blood. It was his right by ancient law. When evidence was contested, the gods decided through combat. The Gothi nodded gravely. Trial by combat is your right. Who will fight for you, Svein? The Jarl smiled, confident again. My champion, Kjell Bonebreaker. The man who emerged from the ranks of Svein's warriors was even larger than Ulf had been. Scars covered his bare arms, each representing a death he had caused. He carried a huge war hammer, a brutal weapon that crushed bones through armor. And who fights for the accusers? The Gothi asked. Gunnar began to step forward, but Thora held him back. You're still recovering. You're not at full strength. Gunnar covered her hand with his. No one else can do this. It's my fight as much as yours. But before he could take another step, a thundering voice echoed across the field. I will fight! Everyone turned. From the forest emerged a warrior who made even Kjell look small. He was a man of middle age. Gray hair and beard, but body still powerful, old scars covering his arms like tattoos. He carried a round shield and a long spear. But it wasn't his size that made the crowd whisper in reverent fear. It was the raven perched on his shoulder. The warrior walked directly to the combat circle. He removed his helmet, revealing he lacked his left eye. Thora felt recognition hit her like lightning. Grimnir, the old man who had accompanied them on the road. But he wasn't old now. It was Odin, the Allfather, in the form of a warrior in his prime. I witnessed the oath of these two, the god declared, voice resonating with power. I saw courage when wolves howled. I saw loyalty when chains bound. I saw honor where many would see only madness. He pointed Gungnir at Svein. And I saw you, Svein the Greedy. Stainlaws, you should defend. I will fight in the name of those you destroyed. Svein was pale as death. He couldn't refuse a god without condemning himself. But he also knew not even Kjell could defeat Odin. He was trapped. Kjell, however, was a warrior to the marrow. He advanced to the circle, raising his hammer. I am only mortal great Odin, but I served my Jarl faithfully. If my destiny is to die today, let it be with honor. Odin inclined his head in respect. You will die as a warrior then. Valhalla awaits you. The combat was brief and brutal. Kjell attacked with all mortal strength he possessed, hammer descending in arcs that cracked the ground. Odin dodged with impossible ease, Gungnir blocking each blow. Then, when Kjell overcommitted to a powerful attack, Odin pierced his defense. Gungnir went through the warrior's heart cleanly and quickly. Kjell fell to his knees, blood running from his lips. I see Valhalla, he whispered. I see the maidens coming. Then he fell, dead before touching the ground. Odin lowered his spear in salute. True warrior, tell Heimdall I send you. Kjell's body began to glow with golden light, then faded. Taken directly to Valhalla, an honor granted only to the most valiant. Odin turned to Svein. The gods have judged. You are guilty. What shall be the punishment? The Gothi consulted the other Jarls. Tradition dictated that a Jarl condemned for grave crimes would lose lands, title, perhaps life, but before they could pronounce sentence, Thora stepped forward. I ask for the right to speak? Everyone looked at her. Women rarely spoke at the thing, but Odin nodded permission. Thora faced Svein, the man who had destroyed everything she loved. She should ask for his death. It would be justice, but she remembered Odin's words. Vengeance has a price. Spilled blood never washes completely clean. My father, she said, voice firm, was a man of peace. He raised sheep, not warriors. He believed honor came from honest work, not spilled blood. She took a deep breath. Svein took my father, my mother, my home, years of my life from me. He took Gunnar's dignity, burned farms of innocence. He deserves death, but killing you won't bring my father back. It will only add more blood to a river already overflowing. The crowd murmured in surprise. Svein looked confused, not understanding. Thora continued, I demand he be stripped of title and lands, that he be exiled from these lands for the rest of his life, that he never again have power over others, and that his wealth be divided among those he harmed. This, she said, is justice without adding death to death. Odin studied her with his single eye, and Thora saw approval there. You have chosen wisely, daughter of courage. Easy vengeance is blood. Hard vengeance is letting an enemy live knowing he has lost everything. The Gothi and Jarls agreed. Svein was stripped of his title then and there, his Jarl's rings torn off, his lands declared confiscated. He would be exiled to lands overseas, never to return under penalty of death. Svein staggered like a struck man. Everything he had worked for, all his wealth and power, lost. He looked at Thora with pure hatred. "You will regret this, Mercy," he spat. "One day I'll return and—" "You will never return," Odin interrupted, "because the gods witnessed your exile. If you set foot in these lands again, Hel herself will drag you to her realm, and there you will suffer an eternity that quick death would never bring." Svein was led away by guards, no longer a jarl but a thrall to his own fate. His lands were divided. Eirik received a portion as compensation for help. Gunnar received lands that originally belonged to Thora's father, plus an additional portion. Thora recovered her childhood home. But Odin wasn't finished. He approached Gunnar and Thora, and again seemed to change, becoming the wanderer they had known on the road. "You passed all tests," he said softly. "You showed courage, loyalty, honor, and, rarer still, mercy. For that I grant a final blessing." He touched Gunnar's forehead with Gungnir. "You will live a long life, not like your father who died young in battle. You will build something lasting. Sons and grandsons will sing your name." Then he touched Thora's forehead. "And you, who paid the highest price, who lost everything but never broke, who chose justice over vengeance when it would have been easier to choose blood. You will be remembered not as a victim, but as the one who broke the cycle. Mothers will tell your story to daughters for generations." Odin stepped back, and as he did, he began to fade. The last thing they saw was his single eye, gleaming with knowledge of all times. Then he was gone, taking the mystery of the gods with him. Only the ravens remained, 2 of them circling 3 times before flying south. Weeks became months. Gunnar and Thora rebuilt the house on the recovered land. Warriors Gunnar had known, loyal men who survived past campaigns, came to swear service. Eirik visited frequently, becoming a close friend beyond an ally. Ragnhild stayed with them, helping manage the growing household. Bjorn forged wedding rings for them, simple gold but perfectly worked. They married under the Gothi's eyes at the sacred stone where the thing had taken place. It was a small ceremony, but meaningful. Gunnar promised to protect her always. Thora promised to stand by him in any storm. Both kept their promises until their last days. The first harvest was abundant, the second even better. Gunnar proved to be a wise leader, fair with tenants, generous with the poor, fierce with bandits threatening the lands. Men came from afar to serve under him, drawn by his reputation for honor. Within 2 years, he had a loyal band of 30 warriors. Thora discovered a talent for healing and mediation. People came seeking advice, bringing disputes to resolve. She listened patiently, found solutions that satisfied both sides when possible. She became known as Thora the Just, a name she carried with more pride than any title. When their first son was born, a boy with his father's eyes and mother's determination, they named him Hakon in honor of his grandfather. Ravens appeared on his birthday, 2 of them landing on the longhouse roof, a sign of Odin's blessing. 2 years later came a daughter, Asta, equally loved. Then another son, Eric, named for the man who had raised Gunnar as his own. But happiness didn't mean absence of pain. Scars remained. Thora still occasionally dreamed of strangling Halvard, waking with trembling hands. Gunnar still had nightmares of Svein's dungeon, waking in panic, searching for chains no longer there. They held each other on those nights, reminding one another they had survived. They had won. They were free. Years passed. Children grew strong and intelligent. Håkon showed talent for the sword, training with Spjothvinner when old enough. Asta inherited her mother's wisdom, mediating disputes between brothers with patience that made Thora laugh. Eric was a natural storyteller, learning ancient sagas from Ragnhild. Eric died first of the old friends, in his bed, surrounded by family. He left lands to his son but asked Gunnar to be the young Jarl's counselor. Gunnar honored the request, helping the new Jarl navigate difficult first years. Bjorn followed years later, peacefully in his sleep after a day at the forge. He left tools to Håkon, who valued them as a sacred inheritance. Ragnhild lived a long life, seeing great-grandchildren before Hel claimed her. She died smiling, saying she had seen Thora's father in dreams, saying he was proud. Thora cried at that funeral more than any other, because Ragnhild had been the last living link to her parents. When Thora and Gunnar grew old, hair gray and bodies aching from decades of work, they often sat in the hall they had built, surrounded by children and grandchildren, telling stories of when they were young, of how they met at a slave market, of how they swore union under the eyes of ravens, of wolves and valkyries and gods in disguise. Grandchildren asked if the stories were true or just exaggerated sagas. Gunnar laughed and said he let them decide, but Thora knew the truth. Every word was real. Every moment of terror, every moment of hope, every impossible choice, real and paid for in blood, sweat, and tears. In the end, it was Gunnar who departed first. He died in his sleep during the winter of his 63rd year, simply didn't wake, peaceful expression on his face. Thora held his hand for hours, refusing to let go. But finally, when ravens came to perch at the window, she understood. Odin was calling him, not to Valhalla because Gunnar hadn't died in battle, but to something beyond, a place the gods prepared for those who lived with honor. They buried Gunnar in a high tomb overlooking the lands he had recovered. Spjótvinur was placed in his hands, his father's sword accompanying the son to the next life. Thora stood by the tomb long after others left, talking to her dead husband. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying when wolves howled, for choosing me when you could have chosen glory, for building a life when destiny offered only death." Thora lived 3 more years after Gunnar. She saw Hakon become Jarl when the lands were officially granted by the assembly. She saw Asta marry a good man from neighboring lands. She saw Eric begin traveling as a skald, taking the family's stories to distant lands. When she finally felt death approaching, she didn't fight. On the final night, 2 Valkyries came. One was the one who had appeared in Svine's Hall years before. The other was new, young, and beautiful. They extended hands to Thora. "It's time," they said. "Gunnar waits." Thora smiled, taking their hands without fear. "Took my time," she replied. "Had to make sure the children would be well." The Valkyries carried her to the sky, through clouds, beyond stars. And there, in a hall that wasn't Valhalla but something gentler, more peaceful, she found Gunnar. He was young again, without scars or pain, smiling that smile she had fallen in love with decades before. "Took your time," he said, echoing her words. Thora laughed, feeling young too, the burden of years falling away. "Had to make sure our legacy was secure." And what a legacy it was. Thora and Gunnar's children became jarls and healers, warriors and farmers, storytellers and builders. Their descendants spread across the northern lands, carrying the blood of Hakon the Broken Sword and the courage of Thora the Just. Centuries later, when Vikings sailed to distant lands, some carried that blood in their veins, that story in their hearts. And on nights when wind howled through trees, when thunder rolled over mountains, when ravens flew against stormy sky, people told the story of a servant who spent her last coins to save an unknown warrior, of a warrior who chose honor over freedom, of how love and loyalty defeated chains and corrupt jarls, of how a choice of mercy broke the cycle of vengeance. The story changed slightly with each telling, as stories do, but the essence remained. 2 souls who found each other when all seemed lost, who swore union when they had nothing, who were tested by wolves and gods and cruel men, who chose each other repeatedly until choices became destiny. And if on especially dark nights, travelers on roads near what were once Gunnar and Thora's lands reported seeing 2 ravens flying together, inseparable against the night sky, well, who could say they were just birds? Perhaps they were reminders that God still watched, that honor still mattered, that love, true and tested, survived even death. The Norns had woven their destiny well. Odin had witnessed and approved. And when skalds sang in mead halls, when mothers told stories to children before sleep, when elders shared wisdom with youth, there was always some version of this saga. Because it was a story that needed to be told, not of easy victory or perfect hero, but of imperfect people making difficult choices, of paying high prices for things that mattered, of finding strength in another when one's own strength failed, of building something lasting in a world constantly trying to destroy. That was the story of Thora and Gunnar. Not just a saga of Vikings and gods, but a deeper truth. That even when the world takes everything, when hope seems dead, when chains seem inevitable, choice remains. Choice of how to respond. choice of who to become, choice of whether to stay when it would be easier to flee. And those choices, woven together over a lifetime, became a destiny more powerful than anything the Norns could weave alone. Because in the end, the gods only prepared the stage. Mortals wrote the story. And this story, born in a slave market with 3 silver coins and a blood oath under watching ravens, would echo through the ages. An ending that was also a beginning, because each time the story was told, it lived again. Each time someone chose honor over ease, loyalty over abandonment, justice over vengeance, Thora and Gunnar lived again. Their names might eventually be forgotten, details confused, but the essence would remain. In some hall of Odin beyond mortal understanding, beyond Valhalla and Folkvanger, beyond even Asgard, 2 souls rested together. Not warriors training for Ragnarok, but simply 2 people who found each other when they needed it most, who saved each other repeatedly, who built something beautiful from nothing but courage and stubbornness. And the gods, looking down, agreed it was more than enough.